lot of the WNBF judges who I've talked to over the years in California, especially, in and around the Mayhem, which is a very competitive show. And when they talk about very, very close classes, they talk about going through each muscle group and comparing them,
Yep.
So like sometimes when people step out on stage, okay, these two people aren't in shape and they're just not that muscular. We know they're fourth and fifth.
Yeah.
Okay, third place guy, he might be top two, maybe even one, but he's just not in the kind of shape in these people. He's got a great physique. Okay, he's clearly third. Symmetry has carried him past and muscularity past the other two guys. All right, but these two, man, they're both shredded. They're both muscular, but they have different strengths and weaknesses. It's kind of like shredded apple versus shredded orange, right? All right, delts, who wins? All right, biceps, who's wins? And then they look at like who won more body parts. Like that's legitimately what has decided multiple class and overall winners at some of these really competitive shows. So I think that does translate into maybe how you should approach this. We've talked about this before, like specialization cycles. You can approach this from a like avenue or mechanism of growth, from like a volume or intensity focus, like we talked about. You can also approach it for a given body part. I think that's something that I think we were doing it a little more in the past, or at least it was more novel, so we were talking about it. But
Yeah.
but I absolutely I still do it. Like I will like so, for example, some people based on their structure in bodybuilding, they will get more appearance of size if like globally, because we don't just look at a person and see body parts, we see their whole physique, if certain body parts are improved. So I know I've used this example a billion times, but if you put me in a front relax shot, my shoulders don't look that good. If you put me in a side shot, I have delts are probably one of my better body parts. So even though like if you were to cut me up like a cadaver and weigh out each of my muscle groups or do a muscle thickness measurement, like, oh, he's got well developed delts. Delts are always going to be a focus on me just because I have a narrower frame. So from the front, it makes me look wider. Same thing with lats. Same thing with quads, just to try to really get that front shot to be less, like anorexic. So,
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
um, and I think that's one of those things that I think you have to understand that to then see why small changes can lead to larger outcomes, and then that can translate into your programming where you're emphasizing a lats and delt cycle or a quads and delt cycle or whatever, and the same thing could be true if you look a little narrow from the side. All right, well, we need to do more pecs and glutes, and things like that. So I think there's a lot of ways to skin this cat, but essentially if you focus on a smaller domain to improve, and therefore you bring everything else down to maintenance, which we know requires a whole lot less work to maintain something, that allows you to put a lot more effort into it and have more reservoir for recovery to actually see that progress. So you brought up Bryce working on his bench press right now. I would be totally fine with seeing his estimated 1RMs on his deadlift and his squat go down 10 kilos while his bench went up, 10 kilos. Like that would put his total down by 10, but we haven't done a peaking cycle yet. Then we haven't gone back to a more proportionate training program where I know those will come back to where they were previously, and then we can push that bench up as well. And the net result, it might take a year, would be, another 10 kilos on his total, not just his bench as an example. And I think you kind of have to have that mentality, but not only do you need to have that mentality to make progress, but it's also more psychologically rewarding because you can actually visually see progress. You get to focus on one thing. And again, it comes back to how the truth will set you free. If you approach this with a little lack of reality in your mindset of, oh, I want to improve everything simultaneously. I just want to get bigger. I just want to run a hypertrophy block, or I just want to, push the big three. When you're in a position where that's going to net very little visible progress, it's going to feel like you're spinning your wheels. So I think it's just really important to pick your spots, pick them tactically, and then not be afraid to do the minimum amount to hold on to the skills you have and what you've developed. And I think that's almost basically like philosophically, when you think about what does this type of periodization look like for a powerlifter or a bodybuilder, it's basically just leaving just the minimal amount of a hook to not lose much while you focus on something really and emphasizing it a lot more. Like, this is an analogy. It's not the same, but when I'm training for a powerlifting meet, I eventually phase out the clean and jerk and snatch completely, but I'm doing just like one top set a week on both movements each to keep it, because it requires so little to keep that skill. And so I don't have to, rewalk ground I've already been down. And I think you take that same philosophy with body parts or, strength. Like, you don't want to have done nothing under 15 reps and just jump to fives, because that's going to feel terrible. Or you might get the person didn't just almost puke on the leg press, but actually puked if you were to go the other way from, 6 reps and under to 20 reps plus all the time. So yeah, some people would be like, no, but I want to shock the system. And I'd be like, yeah, well, you don't really want to shock the system. You want to exploit a new avenue. You don't want to saturate that pathway of progression all the time, but you do want to at least keep that door open so that when you return to it, it's not a totally new territory. You're not dealing with a ton of soreness or whatever. But anyway, I don't know if that was clear, Berto, but I think that's what I'm always thinking of, is how do I just keep a few of these other things that we worked so hard to get, not backslide too much, but then really emphasize some other variable or emphasis or body part or lift or what have you, depending on the context.
I think that now, especially this year more than ever, a lot of people went through a few phases of like deconditioning and reconditioning. You realize just how quickly it comes back.
Yes.
Like I was doing just enough to like decay slowly at the end. I was running out of gas, and I remember I get my gym pants on, and I'm like, oh my God, these fit loose on my legs. Like it wasn't like that like before. And then like literally 3 weeks later, it's like, okay, you're getting to the point again where they're too tight. It's absurd how quickly it comes back. It almost fools you. It's like, it's almost like the roads were built already. We just, there's just a few potholes there, but all the pathways are there, and it gives you the illusion that, I'm gonna get right back to where I was, and I'm going to just blast through it because it comes that rapidly. So you just have to be a lot more okay with the fact that you can't get, you can't do everything the more advanced you become. And you see it in all other sports. It's like, hey, dude, you're a really good, basketball player, but your free throws, like, kind of costing us a few points there. Let's just kind of focus on that. And it comes quite like, other sports kind of intuitively know this, but when it comes to our stuff, again, it goes back to that's not the reality they sell us, We're seeing all Branch Warren videos and Johnny Jackson videos. It's like everything was like 100 miles per hour, like every single day, where, a big part of not just being advanced, but, carrying on from there is learning to conserve energy and knowing when to go and when you have to pull back. It's counterintuitive sometimes because, it's your work ethic that I think gets you through the first few phases. And again, we've gone through a lot of the philosophical stuff, but you just can't separate that. Is it, it's like, hey, I might only be able to add, I don't know, 3 or 4 pounds of muscle to my frame if everything goes according to plan from here. But like, I'm okay with that because I think one, it's like that's just the way it is. I can't change that unless I decide to jump ship. And then the other is like in order to make that happen, it's like I also look at, man, how much personal growth had to happen in order to get myself to that point. I've probably improved, a whole lot more than 3 or 4 pounds of muscle could like actually like convey as like a actual human being.
Mm-hmm. No, I think you're right. It's very difficult to separate the philosophical, or I would even say that the psychological from this as well.
Yeah.
I can't know for sure that going from heavier loads, lower volume, to lighter loads, higher volume, higher reps is actually exploiting a different avenue to growth for a given bodybuilder.
Yep.
It may just be that's, the higher rep stuff and the more volume is doing a lot of work, but then it starts to fade because they can't keep that same level of attentiveness. It's stressful, it's boring. And, I've heard prominent people say that you just need to align your psychology with whatever the optimal approach is. But it's the idea that we have complete agency over our psychology is just doesn't line up with psychology.
Yeah.
Or we wouldn't need psychologists. You tell someone, you're depressed currently because you're unhappy. You just need to align your psychology with being not depressed and you'll be fine. Like, oh shit, why didn't I think of that? So I think the reality is that good bodybuilders and good powerlifters have the psychology, and of course, I'm not saying you have no agency. They can get better and better at maintaining a high level of effort with kind of monotonous training, still doing the overhead press after 15 years or whatever, or lateral raises or whatever lift you're emphasizing does require a certain mentality, and you can improve it. But I also think that having that phasic approach we talked about, it allows you to get excited about training again. It allows you to be present, even if you're still putting forth effort. Like a 10 RPE is still a 10 RPE. I think when some people hear, oh, but you'll be more motivated, you put forth more effort, and a suboptimal plan on paper that you love is better than an optimal plan on paper that you hate. People hear that. I think the more analytical types would be like, well, how? Like, am I still going to failure? Am I still doing the volume? Am I eating the same? How could it be different? And I think some of it is just probably related to that what we talked about earlier. How present are you at each rep? How much intent is there? Is your quote unquote technique as effective as it has been? Are you actually reaching the same levels of tension, or are you just failing in your number of reps that are not the same quality? So can you maintain quality, which probably could be quantified? Like if I hooked you up to a whole bunch of shit, and we looked at your center of pressure on dual force plates and your force output, and we looked at how much momentum or impulse there was at different phases of the lift, and when were you at peak contraction and EMG. And I'm sure if I had a $10 million lab, I could quantify what quality was, and we wouldn't have to speak about it qualitatively, but we can't, and I don't know these things. So I think it is important to acknowledge that even if you do identify with the ethos of just do what's optimal and align your psychology with that, and that it should just be about chasing physiological variables, you're going to actually be suboptimal by doing that without acknowledging the fact that psychology does come into play. And that's not something that there's a one size fits all. Some people need a lot more variety than others. Some people you have to go, all right, here's the reality is they can stay motivated, but it requires a high level of variation. We need to change things every now and again. I wouldn't do that on paper, but it's not useful for me to say, hey, change your psychology. So within those constraints, how do I optimize this plan? And then just be thankful when you get the athlete who's just can stay focused and driven no matter what, because they're purely motivated by progress. I think that's the exception though. And I think for me, that was actually something I had to come to terms
and it's not
with.
as much as they think either,
Very true.
You're right. When you said this, I think it reminded me of your prep, because this last prep, and as bodybuilders, we got 2 games to play. Basically, we have the anabolic game and then the catabolic game, and it's like you can maximize things on both ends, but the fat loss one has obviously the most potential. There's so much more room for improvement there. I think during your last prep, that's we had the off season, yes, like all the body parts that in regards, we can look at performance metrics and we're like, oh, that's no surprise, they look better this go around because of what we've been doing. But I think there was some outside of cardio, also some psychological things going on that I think in regards to, because again, you've always been very bottom line orientated. Like, I remember when you built that that perfect program. You took everything that made sense and a little Frankenstein thing, but it made sense, right? Right. So it's always been you, but I think this last prep, you figured out ways to just make it more. I know what you did, but at the same time, I don't fully know what you did. But you were just so much more cool relative to other years, and boy, did it show up in your physique. Like there was a lot more water retention there than I think both you and I ever suspected.
Yeah, in previous preps, absolutely. I think that probably was the whole quad thing. One thing where I consciously chose to do something that I think we would both agree was probably suboptimal, that I knew would be better overall because I could sustain it mentally, was when I was like, look, I'm not going to be going anywhere. I don't have any conferences. Let's just destroy me in May.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Because June is when I got to start traveling again and compete. My students aren't doing anything crazy right now. I don't need to be a very good human. I just need to basically not be a dick to my wife right now and then stay indoors. And you were like, well, do we really want to just like, because I remember you were giving me feedback. I was like, let's just go to like, I think the average was 1,600 calories for 3 weeks. And we were like, but you only need to lose like 4 more pounds. We could just do this over 6, 7, 8 weeks and you'd feel much better. And I'd be like, but would I though? Like, it feels terrible no matter what. I just want to get it done and then start bringing food up. And yeah, like if you look at it from an energy availability standpoint, if you look at it from a rate of weight loss standpoint, if you look at it from a performance standpoint, nutrient efficiency, like you could make a ton of arguments why I shouldn't have done that. But in reality, I think that was the right call. And it enabled me to strike when I would say the behavioral social environment was ideal for me. And I think that's just one example of leveraging what is typically a psychological asset that most advanced lifters have, regardless of how good they are, is that they can put the hammer down. And I think we've talked about this, man, for a decade now on 3DMJ. The difference between a hardcore intermediate athlete and a hardcore advanced athlete is that the hardcore intermediate just brings the hammer down every time and breaks their toys and their desk and their computer, while the advanced athlete knows when it's time to hang the hammer up, recover, or use a screwdriver, but the hammer is still there. And it can absolutely break some stuff. So yeah.
Yeah. No, and that fat loss side, I think, as a natural bodybuilder is where I think for the rest of your training career, like you could like make progress there. Like it's pretty infinite, and quite often with advanced guys, like, when they bring us on, it's like, we didn't necessarily help you gain any muscle. We didn't have enough time for that. Like that was going to be a 3-year off season, dude, but you retained way more. So you always have that as a, as a bodybuilder. It's that fat loss. There's always so many things to correct there. Usually, like again, like you can look back maybe already at this last prep, and there's like, okay, I would have changed this, and that. I know with my last prep, kind of the same ordeal. I'm like, okay, that went well, but it's a lot more accelerated on that side for sure.
Honestly, I think the main thing I would have done was probably just travel a little less instead of seeing how much travel I could get away with, and how I could not change my life at all for prep. Actually acknowledge that maybe I should not 72 hours before a show travel to literally the other side of the planet. So
I did that my 2017 year, and I spent the whole month of July not at home, basically for that same reason, because I'm like I need to prove this to myself, and yeah, we've done it, and we're okay. I think next year. Next time I do prep, I will say no to a lot of things and just stay locked up a little more.
Absolutely, man.